Saturday night, day 4 of the Trump warrant situation, and we need to talk about what's happening underneath the headlines because this is not what you think it is. 34 Republican elected officials requested Secret Service briefings today. In one morning, 4 days into this, that number should tell you something, and what it's telling you is not about Trump. Here's what has actually documentably changed in 96 hours. A federal arrest warrant, active and enforceable, issued against a former president of the United States. First time in American history that has ever happened. The director of the Secret Service, placed on administrative leave pending a protocol review that has never been conducted before because the scenario has never existed before. 3 constitutional scholars filed emergency amicus briefs on presidential immunity, not for a case that might happen, for a situation that is happening right now. But that's the surface. Underneath, Republican officials are quietly, and I mean very quietly, coordinating with the Department of Justice and consulting constitutional lawyers on a question that has never had to be answered in the real world. The party is fracturing along a fault line nobody is reporting on yet, and the fracture is not about Trump's contempt of court anymore. I'm going to show you who this actually impacts, not the cable news Chiron version. Real people, real institutions, real structural changes to how the American government functions. 3 specific groups getting hit right now. 2 institutions adapting in real time. 1 precedent that changes the presidency permanently. By the end of this, you'll understand why this matters even if you couldn't care less about Donald Trump. Let me break down what has happened in 4 days, and I mean what has measurably, documentably happened, not speculation. Immediate casualties you can count. Secret Service leadership, director on administrative leave, deputy director resigned outright, 47 agents requested transfers away from protective details. That's 47 agents who spent years getting assigned to presidential protection asking to be moved anywhere else. Trump's legal team, 4 attorneys, have withdrawn from representation, citing irreconcilable differences with their client, which is lawyer speak for he won't listen and we're not going down with him. The Republican Party, 12 state party chairs, issued statements explicitly distancing themselves from Trump. The RNC has scheduled an emergency meeting that was not on anyone's calendar a week ago. Market reaction, and this is where it gets interesting. Constitutional law firms are reporting a 580% increase in inquiries. That's not a typo. Presidential security insurance policies, which are a real thing that exists, now requiring judicial compliance clauses in the coverage. Political betting markets swung 23 points toward Republican primary chaos, which means money is moving based on the belief that the party is headed for a contested nomination. Policy response happening right now? Supreme Court scheduled an emergency conference for Monday on presidential immunity. That's tomorrow. The Secret Service is actively implementing new judicial order compliance protocols that did not exist on Wednesday. The Senate Judiciary Committee announced hearings on enforcement of court orders against executive officials, hearings that will establish precedent for every president after this one. That is measurable, documented fallout in 96 hours, and we're just getting started. Now let me show you the deeper impacts that nobody is connecting yet because they matter more than the arrest warrant itself. A federal arrest warrant against a former president doesn't just affect Donald Trump. It affects every future president, every Secret Service agent currently serving, every Republican candidate trying to figure out how to navigate this, and the entire power balance between the federal courts and the executive branch. Fast recap of how we got here. Day 1, Wednesday, April 22nd. Judge Tanya Chutkan ordered Trump to surrender documents related to the January 6th case, set a Friday deadline after 18 months of delays and motions and extensions. Day 2, Thursday, April 23rd. Trump's attorneys filed a motion to reconsider. Chutkan denied it within 3 hours, extended the deadline to midnight Friday as a final courtesy. Day 3, Friday, April 24th. Trump held a rally instead of complying, told the crowd no judge can touch a president, and the deadline passed at midnight with no compliance. Day 4, today, Saturday, April 25th. Chutkan issued an arrest warrant at 1:47 in the morning. The Secret Service is now in crisis over how to execute it. The Republican Party is fracturing in real time. That's the sequence, but here's who this affects beyond Trump and one contempt case. Every Secret Service agent currently protecting Trump affected. Every Republican presidential candidate trying to plan a campaign affected. Every federal judge presiding over cases involving powerful defendants who ignore court orders affected. Every future president who might face legal accountability after leaving office permanently affected. This is not political theater. This is the American constitutional structure being stress tested in real time, and we're about to find out if it holds. Hit that subscribe button because this analysis goes deeper than the headlines, and I'm tracking the constitutional implications that will outlast this news cycle. Group 1 Secret Service agents on presidential protective details. Who they are matters because their job just became legally impossible. These are special agents assigned to protect current and former presidents, their families, and major candidates. Approximately 3,200 Secret Service agents work in protective operations. Their specific impact breaks down like this. Legal jeopardy. If they prevent execution of the arrest warrant, they are obstructing justice, federal crime. If they facilitate the arrest, they are violating their protective mission, which is the core purpose of their job. Career crisis, because these agents trained for decades on the principle that protecting the principle is absolute, no exceptions, no asterisks. Now they're facing a scenario where protecting the principle might be illegal. Protocol chaos. There is no manual for arresting the person you are assigned to protect. That manual does not exist because the scenario was not supposed to exist. Timeline, this is hitting right now. Agents are calling personal attorneys. The Secret Service Union is demanding guidance from leadership that doesn't have guidance to give. Real example. Senior Secret Service agent, 19 years on presidential details, currently assigned to Trump. Situation before this week, clear mission, protect the principle from all threats, physical, legal, doesn't matter, your job is protection. Situation right now, received a copy of the arrest warrant from the U.S. Marshals Service, must choose between protective duty and a federal court order. There's no training for this choice. Situation in 30 days, likely reassigned or resigned because either way he betrays something, either the protective mission or the court order, and either way his career in presidential protection is over. Group 2, Republican presidential candidates. Who they are matters because their entire campaign strategy just collapsed. These are declared and prospective 2028 Republican presidential candidates. 8 declared candidates, 12 more seriously considering it. Their specific impact is a political calculation that has no good answer. Defend Trump, you alienate moderate voters who think no one is above the law. Respect the warrant, you alienate the base that sees this as political persecution. Presidential precedent fear. If courts can issue arrest warrants for Trump, they can issue them for any future president, which means any future Republican president, which might be one of these candidates. Fundraising chaos. Donors are demanding clarity on where candidates stand before writing 7-figure checks, and there is no clear position that satisfies everyone. Why this group didn't see it coming? They assumed Trump's legal issues would resolve through appeals and delays and eventually fade, not through an actual arrest warrant that forces a binary choice right now. Real example. Governor of a swing state, leading Republican contender, built entire campaign on law and order message. Situation before this week, rising in polls, strong fundraising, clear message that resonated with suburban voters. Situation right now has been silent on the warrant for 36 hours. Campaign donations down 67% since the warrant issued. Staff is divided on how to respond, and the division is leaking to reporters. Situation in 30 days. Either he chooses Trump and loses general election viability, or he chooses rule of law and loses primary viability. There is no middle ground, and the silence is killing him already. Group 3, federal judges with cases against powerful defendants. Who they are matters because Judge Chut can just change their jobs permanently. These are district and circuit judges presiding over cases involving politically connected, wealthy, or powerful defendants who ignore court orders. We're talking about hundreds of federal judges with these cases on their dockets right now. Why they're suddenly exposed? Chutkan just proved that arrest warrants against the powerful are actually enforceable, not just theoretical. That removes the excuse that other judges have been using to avoid contempt citations against defendants who can fight back. Specific impact, precedent pressure. Defense attorneys are already citing the Chutkan precedent to argue their powerful clients should face the same accountability. Personal security, judges who enforce aggressively may face the same threats that Chutkan is facing right now, and those threats are real and specific. This group thought they were insulated because the assumption was that contempt citations against truly powerful people were theoretical tools, not practical enforcement mechanisms. Real example. Federal judge in the Southern District of New York with a case against a billionaire CEO who has ignored 5 consecutive court orders. Situation before this week, judge issued orders, defendant ignored them, judge reluctantly accepted excuses to avoid confrontation because what's the alternative? Arrest a billionaire? Situation right now, defense bar filed a motion explicitly citing the Chutkan warrant. Quote, if a former president must comply with court orders under threat of arrest, so must our client, end quote. Situation in 30 days, this judge must either issue a warrant and become a target for the same backlash Chutkan is facing, or back down and lose credibility permanently. Every defendant in that courtroom will know the judge blinked. You see who this actually hits? Like this breakdown because it goes way beyond Trump. This is about power, precedent, and accountability in the American system. Change 1, presidential immunity limits, and this is permanent. What it was before this week? Presidential immunity was broadly assumed to extend indefinitely for former presidents. No court had ever tested enforcement with an actual arrest warrant, so the assumption was it couldn't happen. What it is right now, former presidents can be held in contempt and subjected to arrest warrants like any other citizen. That just became real. Why it won't go back. Chutkan's warrant is now in the federal court record. Every future case involving a former president has this citation available. The theoretical became actual, and you cannot put that back in the box. Concrete example of impact. Future former president faces a court order. Before this week, could delay indefinitely based on assumed immunity and the belief that no judge would actually enforce. After this week, any judge can cite the Chutkan precedent and issue a warrant if there's noncompliance. The calculation just changed for every former president forever. Change 2, Secret Service authority versus judicial authority. What was assumed before this week? The Secret Service protective mission supersedes other law enforcement equities. They control access to protectees, period. What's now proven? Federal court orders supersede Secret Service protective protocols when there's a direct conflict and the courts win. Who gained power? The federal judiciary can now compel action even against Secret Service resistance. The U.S. Marshals Service is now established as the enforcement arm even for Secret Service protectees, which was never tested before. Who lost power? Secret Service protective mission is no longer absolute. Former presidents cannot hide behind Secret Service protection to avoid compliance with court orders. Concrete example. Before this week, Secret Service could deny other law enforcement access to a protectee by citing security concerns, and that was the end of the conversation. After this week, a federal warrant trumps security protocols, and the Secret Service must either facilitate execution or step aside. They don't get to just say no anymore. Change 3, political calculation for court defiance. What wasn't possible before? No modern example of an arrest warrant for a former president existed, so defying court orders had no visible consequence precedent. What's now established? Judges will issue arrest warrants against former presidents, not theoretical, actual. Any political figure defying a court order now knows an arrest warrant is a real possibility, not a political impossibility. Concrete example, future scenario. Powerful politician faces an unfavorable court ruling and considers defiance. Before this week, could calculate the judge won't actually enforce against someone at my level. After this week, sees the Trump warrant precedent and the calculation changes. Compliance becomes rational because enforcement is proven to be real. These are not temporary overreactions to one situation. These are permanent changes to American governance. The relationship between the courts and executive power just fundamentally shifted. For 250 years, presidential power was understood to include practical immunity from judicial enforcement. You could theoretically hold a president accountable, but practically it didn't happen. That assumption died at 1:47 a.m. on April 25, 26. Every president from this day forward knows the courts can enforce orders against you with arrest warrants actually, in reality, not theoretically. That is not hyperbole. That is the new constitutional reality. The theoretical limit on presidential power just became a practical limit, and that changes everything about how presidents will behave in office and after. Secondary consequences that are already happening. Area 1, state-level prosecutions of federal officials. Not directly involved in this case, but affected because state attorneys general now see a federal precedent for aggressive enforcement against powerful officials. Specific changes already happening. New York Attorney General announced a renewed effort to enforce the civil fraud judgment against Trump, explicitly citing the federal warrant as precedent that enforcement is possible. Georgia prosecutors requested an expedited hearing on Trump's compliance with discovery orders, same reasoning. Area 2, presidential campaign security logistics. The connection that wasn't obvious until now. Secret Service protection for candidates now comes with judicial compliance liability attached. Impact: candidates are actively reconsidering whether to accept Secret Service protection because it creates a legal vulnerability they didn't have with private security. Private security firms are reporting a 340% increase in inquiries from presidential campaigns wanting protection without federal strings attached. Area 3, judicial nomination politics, and nobody saw this coming. Republican senators are now facing impossible confirmation votes on judicial nominees because any nominee who supports the Chutkan precedent loses the Republican base, but any nominee who opposes it appears to reject rule of law and loses everyone else. Example: 3 pending circuit court nominations were withdrawn this morning. The nominees cited the current political climate making confirmation impossible. Senate Judiciary postponed all nomination hearings indefinitely pending constitutional clarity that may never come. The ripples spread outward in waves you can track. Chutkan's warrant affects Trump directly, which affects Secret Service protocols, which affects candidate security, which affects the private security industry, which affects judicial nominations, which affects federal court composition for the next generation. 5 degrees of separation from one contempt citation. A document production dispute in one judge's courtroom just cascaded into a constitutional crisis affecting executive branch protective operations, presidential campaign logistics, judicial confirmation politics, state-federal prosecutorial coordination, and private security markets. And we are only 96 hours into this. This reaches further than you thought when you clicked on this video. Stay with me because the next sections show you how institutions are adapting right now and what every single person is missing. How institutions are adapting and the speed matters. The Secret Service created a judicial liaison office within 18 hours of the warrant. Dedicated office for coordinating protective operations with federal court orders did not exist Wednesday, exists now. Emergency protocol revision: agents are now required to report any court orders involving protectees within 2 hours. Legal counsel has been assigned to every protective detail going forward. Why they moved this fast? The director's career ended over this. The agency is now protecting institutional survival over protective mission, and that is a seismic shift in priorities. Example: Secret Service issued an internal memo at 3:47 a.m. Saturday morning. Quote, "Judicial orders take precedence over protective protocols when lawfully issued by a court of competent jurisdiction," end quote. That is a complete reversal of 60 years of doctrine reversed in 3 hours. The Republican National Committee took a different approach. Distance from Trump personally while defending presidential immunity as a principle. Their calculation: they can preserve Trump-based voters while protecting down-ballot candidates from the warrant fallout. Whether it will work, no. The Trump base sees any distance as betrayal. Moderates see the immunity defense as lawlessness. The RNC is caught in an impossible middle, and the emergency meeting next week is about deciding which side to lose. The federal judiciary is coordinating response through the Judicial Conference. Emergency guidance issued to all federal judges. Quote, "The Chutkan precedent does not create an obligation to issue warrants against all non-compliant defendants, but establishes that such warrants are within judicial authority when warranted by the circumstances," end quote. Translation: you can do this now, but you don't have to use your judgment. The pattern: everyone is creating new protocols and legal positions overnight. Nobody is addressing the root question: can the presidency actually function if former presidents face the same legal accountability as ordinary citizens? That gap is the next constitutional crisis, and it's coming fast. Missing angle 1: future presidents will govern completely differently, and no one is talking about this. Everyone is focused on Trump's accountability right now. Nobody is noticing how this changes presidential decision-making going forward, and that matters more than this one case. Why it matters? If presidents know they face real legal accountability after leaving office, they will govern either more cautiously or more desperately. There is no middle option. Example: future president facing a decision that might be legally questionable. Before this week, could assume post-presidential immunity as a shield, do what needs to be done, sort it out later. After this week, knows the Chutkan precedent means future prosecution is real. So either doesn't take the action, which is governance paralysis, or goes all in on staying in power permanently, which is an authoritarian incentive structure. Missing angle 2: Secret Service careers are becoming untenable, and agents are quietly planning exits. While the Trump drama dominates coverage, Secret Service agents are doing the math on their futures. Protective detail used to be the most prestigious assignment in federal law enforcement. Now it's a legal liability minefield. Nobody is reporting this because it doesn't fit the rule of law wins narrative, but it's happening. Example, senior agents eligible for retirement are accelerating their plans. 17 submitted retirement paperwork this week alone, not normal attrition. The agency is losing institutional knowledge because the protective mission became a legally impossible job. Missing angle 3, and this is the real question nobody wants to say out loud. The public debate is framed as should Trump be above the law, yes or no? The actual question is, can we have effective presidents if they are not partially above the law while in office and after? If you answer that question honestly, you end up in an uncomfortable place. Either you accept that presidents need some immunity to govern boldly in crisis, or you accept that the presidency becomes cautious, weak, and ineffective. Example, Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus during the Civil War. Probably illegal, arguably necessary to save the Union. Under the Chutkan precedent, a future Lincoln faces an arrest warrant from a federal judge the moment he leaves office. Result, either no bold presidential action in existential crisis, or the president ignores courts entirely and becomes an authoritarian. Those are your options. These missing angles matter because they reveal that a victory for rule of law in this case might create either an ungovernable presidency or an authoritarian incentive structure, and nobody is talking about that trade-off. Hit that like button if you're seeing the bigger picture now, because these overlooked angles change everything about how we should be evaluating what just happened. How this could play out, 3 scenarios, and we need to be clear-eyed about which one is most likely. Scenario A, constitutional clarity. What happens in this scenario? The Supreme Court takes an emergency appeal, establishes a clear framework for when former presidents can be held in contempt versus when immunity applies, creates a workable doctrine that balances accountability with presidential function. What that requires. The Supreme Court reaches consensus, which is unlikely given the current ideological environment. Both parties accept the ruling as legitimate. Trump either complies or is arrested peacefully. Probability 20%, and that's generous. Why so low? Because it requires institutional trust that no longer exists in this country. The Supreme Court itself is seen as a partisan institution. Any ruling will be rejected by the losing side as illegitimate. Who wins if this happens? Rule of law, clear standards established. Future presidents, defined boundaries. Courts, authority confirmed and respected. Who loses? Trump if the ruling goes against him. Presidential power maximalists if immunity is limited going forward. Scenario B, messy standoff, eventual compliance. What happens in this scenario? The warrant remains active for weeks. Secret Service and U.S. Marshals negotiate voluntary surrender terms behind the scenes. Trump eventually complies to avoid the imagery of a physical arrest. The contempt gets resolved, but the constitutional questions remain unanswered. What that requires. Trump's legal team convinces him that arrest photos hurt his 2028 campaign more than compliance does. Secret Service facilitates a face-saving surrender that looks voluntary. Probability 50%. Why? Because this follows the historical pattern. Standoffs like this usually end in a negotiated resolution. Both sides have strong incentives to avoid a physical arrest confrontation. Who wins? Everyone, partially. No constitutional crisis, no arrest photos, contempt resolved. Who loses? Constitutional clarity, the precedent remains unclear. Rule of law, because powerful people still get negotiated treatment. Public confidence, because it looks like a special deal. Scenario C, constitutional crisis. What happens in this scenario? Trump refuses to surrender. The Secret Service refuses to facilitate the arrest. U.S. Marshals cannot execute the warrant without Secret Service cooperation. Competing court orders emerge from different jurisdictions. Constitutional deadlock with no resolution mechanism. What that requires. Trump calculates that defiance helps his 2028 campaign more than compliance. The replacement Secret Service director backs protective mission over judicial authority. Republican governors offer Trump sanctuary in their states and dare federal authorities to act. Probability 30% and rising. Why? Because the political incentives align toward defiance. The Trump base rewards confrontation. There is no enforcement mechanism if the Secret Service won't cooperate, and legally there might not be one. Who wins in this scenario? Trump, short-term, rallies the base, looks strong. Presidential immunity advocates, courts are proven unenforceable against determined resistance. Who loses? Rule of law, courts cannot enforce their own orders. Judicial authority, warrants become meaningless if they can't be executed. Constitutional structure, the system breaks down. Current trajectory suggests scenario B is most likely, messy standoff, eventual compliance. But if the Supreme Court rules against Trump quickly and definitively, this shifts towards scenario C, defiance. If Trump's polling drops significantly, shifts towards scenario A, he cuts a deal. The next 72 hours determine which path we're on. Subscribe to this channel because I will be tracking which scenario unfolds in real time and what it means for presidential power going forward. This is history happening and you need to understand it. Practical preparation for people directly affected, and this matters even if you think it doesn't apply to you. If you are in federal law enforcement right now, expect conflicting orders from courts versus executive branch leadership. Expect career-defining decisions about which authority to follow. Next 30 days. Actions you should take. Document every order, every decision, every supervisor instruction. Your paper trail is your only protection. Consult personal legal counsel before executing any order related to this warrant. Do not assume institutional loyalty protects you. The Secret Service director learned this lesson the hardest way possible. If you are a Republican candidate or elected official, expect a forced choice between Trump loyalty and rule of law. Expect immediate base backlash regardless of which choice you make. Next 60 days. Actions you should take. Decide your position right now and stick to it. Wavering looks worse than any consistent position, even a wrong one. Prepare two versions of every public statement, one if Trump complies, one if he defies. Do not wait to see which way the political winds blow, because by then you will have already been forced to choose on the record. If you are a federal judge, expect aggressive motions citing the Chutkan precedent, demanding warrants against your powerful defendants who are ignoring orders. Expect increased security threats if you enforce aggressively. Immediate actions. Request a U.S. Marshals Protection Assessment for yourself and your family. If you have high-profile defendants, coordinate with other judges facing similar cases. Institutional support matters. Do not assume this precedent obligates you to issue warrants. Judicial discretion still exists. The Chutkan precedent expands your authority. It does not mandate its use. For everyone else, regardless of direct involvement, constitutional crisis affects government function broadly. Expect delays in federal services, court backlogs, political paralysis across multiple agencies. What to watch? Supreme Court emergency calendar signals legal resolution timeline. Secret Service staffing and resignation numbers signals institutional breakdown severity. Timeline reassess in 7 days. If the warrant is still unexecuted after 1 week, scenario C becomes the most likely outcome. Next phase breakdown. Short term, next 7 days. Supreme Court decides whether to take an emergency appeal. U.S. Marshals and Secret Service negotiate execution protocols. Trump either surrenders, defies, or appeals. Key dates. Monday, April 28th, Supreme Court Emergency Conference on Immunity Issues. Wednesday, April 30th, Secret Service Director Replacement testifies before House Oversight Committee, and that testimony will reveal the administration's position. These two events determine whether we are on a legal resolution pathway or a political confrontation pathway. Medium term, 7 to 30 days. Either the warrant gets executed through compliance or arrest, or a constitutional deadlock emerges with no clear resolution. Supreme Court either issues guidance or declines to intervene, and that decision matters enormously. What to watch? Secret Service agent resignation rates shows institutional stress level. Republican officials' public statements shows party fracture severity. Supreme Court procedural signals shows whether they will resolve this or punt it back to the political branches.